Alright then, the final series of The Animals of Farthing Wood, Series 3. What the heck happened with it? Series 1 was great, Series 2 was even better, but 3... If you can't already tell, this series just isn't good. Honestly, I don't know what happened to it, in one way or another. But Series 3 just has done so many steps down compared to Seasons 1 and 2. I'll say this. Series 1 was the journey. Series 2 was the characterization. Series 3 is what happens when you have too much to work with for too young of an audience. Allow me to explain. First, as always, is the story. In Series 1, there was one main plot, traveling to White Deer Park from Farthing Wood. The plots there does split, but only for a few episodes before turning back to normal again. Series 2 also had one main plot, surviving in White Deer Park and dealing with Scarface. The plots here split into two permanently when Bold left his father, and it shifts between both plots from there. Series 3 almost immediately puts too much on itself. Straight away, the series splits into three separate plots. Owl finding a mate, the weasels finding a new home outside the park, and the animals in the park dealing with not one, but two antagonists, both of which aren't very good and I'll get to later. This isn't for all the plots, but they are too predictable at least.
Weasel, where are you going?
Away from White Deer Park!
Wait for me!
Forever!
Yeah, Weasel, we all know you'll be back. Don't try to kid yourself. Here's another thing. Series 1 and Series 2 were also not afraid to drift off into more shocking and mature content. However, I can't pick one moment in Series 3 that would be too shocking and overboard. The only moments I could think of, real personally, was when the animals fight the rats, and even then it wasn't very much. Now don't get me wrong, seeing a rat shaking like a ragdoll was still pushing the limits, but when looking back, these scenes are very tame and dulled down more than it would normally be. Here's a death scene from Series 1. Here's one from Series 2. And here is from Series 3. You see where I'm getting at now? One of the biggest reasons why it's more kid-friendly in my opinion is one big fact when comparing the TV show from the books. Now, keep in mind, I didn't read the actual books that the series is based off, but what I could gather, two characters in this story, Toad and Bully, weren't supposed to actually be alive, yet the writers decided to keep them in anyway. Seriously? You never did this before, why did you do it now? Let's talk about the way the show actually looks. I'm sure you've noticed it by now, but there's quite a change in art style and appearance when looking from one to the other. The colors on the animals are more prominent, especially on such animals like the foxes, owls, or deer. It was minor before in Series 1 and almost non-existent in Series 2, but the fact that the characters just stand out so much from the background is too obvious to ignore here, especially straight away in the title sequence. As for the animation, it's not as realistic as the other series had it, and another huge factor that changed from one to another. Different scenes looked more choppy, with facial expressions and movements, and it looks just a little too cartoony, if you know what I mean. They even started using the sliding animation when the characters look like they're just flying along the floor, when the other times they're just moving under their own power, which is simply lazy. As for designs themselves, the characters remain alright, but weasels and the rats are a bit of an issue. The weasels still look like weasels, don't get me wrong with that, but they're constantly moving about on just two legs, whereas before they were seen still moving on all fours, like actual weasels do. The rats, though, they're even worse. They don't even look like actual rats you would see today. A rat is basically a larger version of a mouse, and the fact that they just made the main problem for the animals so cartoonically ugly is just not something that should be. With the animation and story aside, now we got the characters. Since this series has 3 different plots to follow, there's a bit of a character overload, and has more one-shot characters than the other 2 combined. It's not the fact that they're not as developed as they had before, but they're not given enough time to develop them. They have 3 plots to follow, 13 episodes to work with, and they have to scramble them all in together at once. Like I said, they have too many to work with. Different characters come and go, and all of them are bad, mind you, but they're not as in-depth as they had before. First, there's the main villains, Trey the White Deer, and Bully the White Rat. Trey is basically as the other characters describe him.
The biggest stag in the herd is a right thuggish monster. He's huge, and he's always charging about in a bad temper.
The end. Seriously, that's really all the character he has going for him. He cares strictly for himself and his watering hole, and that's about it. I say himself because one scene shows him chasing off a ton of other animals, including more deer. To put it simply, he's the evil version of Hulk in White Deer Park. Then we have Bully, the main villain, more focused on and more annoying. He plays the average trope on wanting to take over the park, and trying to drive all the other animals off. He's not too good of a villain. He doesn't do much himself, he plays off more jokes than a villain should do. His catchphrase is annoying as sin, and his voice doesn't make it any better.
Who am I? 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 Who am I?
You are Bully, a great leader.
Yeah, I knows. Who am I?
One other thing, how is he in charge of so many rats? It's honestly never mentioned and never explained very well. My only guess really is his age, I guess, because these are rats, and rats are often the thing the world's trying to get rid of. So, considering how old he is, I guess that's the only main reason. I honestly don't know, really. We're comparing both of these villains towards Series 2's Scarface. That Blue Fox has got them both beat. When it comes to villain interaction, I have one question. Why isn't Trey stomping Bully to death by now? Each time each side is on screen, neither side is acknowledged at once. Bully only gives mention to Trey only one time, and Trey could care less about the rats. How contrived can you get? As for the other characters that show up, they're one-note as ever, but are still rather noticeable nonetheless. Sinuous is Adder's mate, who's basically the male version of her. There's a pig named...
I'll never be sausages.
yeah, that, who's just an annoying piglet to the weasels. Cleo and Fido, Weasel's children, are just Series 1 Weasel times 2, and there are other examples of this. Some are still good though. There's Plucky, the speedy and witty fox of White Deer Park, and his friend Dash, a kind-hearted but boastful hare who loves boasting about her own speed. Plucky though, and you can take this how you like it, has not actually gone through any exact hardship as everyone else. Each idea he conjures up goes down flawlessly, and while good on the surface, doesn't put him in any kind of pressure. Not saying I don't like the guy, but some challenge would be nice. There is one particular character I would want to talk about, and that's actually the moth-bitten rook. It is pretty clear that this is indeed an old bird, and was introduced to Owl when she was looking for a mate by a bunch of bats as a pure joke. This is purely speculation on my part, but with the rook constantly telling Owl that he loves her, it would at first make him just simply desperate for any mate. Then this happens.
You're safe.
I managed to escape by myself, but thank you for helping. You were very brave.
I love this owl. I can't help myself.
I'll look after him. He's my mate, you see.
I didn't know he had one.
He's always off after owls. He's always been the same.
I see. Well,
I'll look after him.
yes, and, be sure you do. I've grown quite fond of him.
He's a dear, isn't he?
This at first says that he's grown simply too old, but with his mates saying he's always been the same, this might actually say that there is actually something really wrong with him. An extremely severe identity crisis, maybe? And Owl treated him so badly, but only realizes now how harsh she actually was being. If this was the intent or not is entirely up to you, but that's my own 2 bets on it. The returning characters of the series aren't actually developed too much from before, with the big exception of Owl and Adder, which honestly is about time they did so. Strange how both big developments involve them getting mates, getting them to care about something more deeply for once. Adder, however, got a severe end eventually, and showed how murderous she could be to those responsible. For Owl, well, I would like to say I like her plot out of the 3 the most, and it's taking the elements of both series 1 and 2 and putting them together much better. Not in new places, mind you, but returning to older places as well, including Farthing Husks, which used to be Farthing Wood.
That silly cat was right. This is Farthing Wood. I really am home. Home at last.
It's great to see her truly happy for once after all she's been through as well. For my overall view of this, meh. This series doesn't hold up to the last 2, and with a few saving graces here and there, it still doesn't hide its flaws. Still, even if dulled down for the kids' sake, it's still a decent watch at the least. Well, I'll see you all later. Neon out.